position. Speaking outside Tel Aviv's defense ministry, they claim he ignores their plight while continuing military operations in the Gaza Strip. Let's listen in to what a mother of an Israeli hostage had to say.
במשך 690 ימים הממשלה מנהלת מלחמה ללא מטרה ברורה. איך החטופים החיים והחללים יחזרו? מי ישלוט בעזה ביום שאחרי? כיצד משקמים את המדינה שלנו? היום זה ברור שנתניהו מפחד מדבר אחד, וזהו הלחץ הציבורי.
Israel estimates that around 20 hostages remain alive still in the Gaza Strip, out of the 239 taken during Hamas's October the 7th attack. Negotiations mediated by Egypt and Qatar have reached a critical stage, with Hamas demanding full Israeli withdrawal and the safe return of displaced people. Mass protests have erupted in Tel Aviv as the Hostages and Missing Families Forum leads a national day of struggle. Highways and ministers' homes have been blocked, with relatives calling for an immediate hostage release. The protests come as Israel's offensive in Gaza continues, with thousands dead and nearly the entire population displaced amid international calls for ceasefire and humanitarian access. We are now joined by Professor Gilead Hirschberger. He is a political psychologist from Reichman University. He joins us live from Israel now to talk to us live. Thank you very much, Professor Hirschberger, for joining us here on NewsX World. Professor, families of these hostages have accused the Netanyahu government of sacrificing their loved ones to save his political career. How do you believe such a perception shapes public trust in the leadership narrative here during wartime?
I think it's important to understand that the political climate in Israel has changed over the course of the war. If initially there was a high level of support for the war in Gaza, today we see opinion poll after opinion poll that the majority of Israelis support a ceasefire, they support an end to the war, and a return of all the hostages. At the moment, the Israeli initiative, the Netanyahu initiative to attack the city of Gaza enjoys very little popularity among Israelis. Most Israelis want to see the war over and want to see the hostages return.
Yes, many of these families are not only grieving but leading these mass protests. What are the mechanisms which are driving these families to being such major political actors in such moments of national trauma here?
I think we've reached a point where many of these families are desperate. Their loved ones have been in Gaza for nearly 2 years. It's very clear that if Israel does engage in the new offensive on the city of Gaza, it would endanger the lives of the remaining hostages. When there is at least a hope of a compromise, of a deal on the table, there are indications that such a deal is possible. And these families are demanding the government to take the deal and not continue with the offensive.
Thank you very much, Professor Hirschberger. You are staying with us for more updates from the ongoing conflict in Gaza. The world is responding to yesterday's strike at Nasser Hospital, which killed 5 journalists from various organizations. China's foreign ministry has just joined the global condemnation of the strike in Gaza, calling for an immediate ceasefire and urging Israel to stop military action. Here is what Jiao Jiaquan, the China foreign ministry spokesman, had to say on the issue.
我们对医护人员和记者再次在冲突中不幸遇难感到震惊，予以谴责，对遇难者表示哀悼，向遇难者家属表示慰问。中方高度关注当前加沙地带局势，反对和谴责一切伤害平民、损害民用设施、 违反国际法的行为，包括针对新闻记者的暴力行为。
Germany has also said it was shocked by the Israeli airstrikes on the hospital, which included journalists in the dead, and called for an investigation. The German Foreign Ministry urged Israel to allow media access and protect journalists operating in the Strip. US President Donald Trump expressed displeasure with emphasizing the need to end the conflict. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy also said he was horrified by the strikes and called for an immediate ceasefire. Turkish President Erdogan condemned Israel for, quote, villainous attacks, blaming the Netanyahu government for continuing strikes that destroy humanity's basic values. French President Emmanuel Macron also weighed in and called the attacks intolerable, noting that the deaths of at least 20 people, including journalists, stressing the need to safeguard civilians in Gaza. Now we're once again joined by Professor Hirschberger. As we've just heard, a strong plethora of reactions there from both adversaries of the Israeli state and, of course, traditional allies of Israel. What are your thoughts on the current military actions of the Israeli Defense Forces in the Gaza Strip? 5 journalists killed in these strikes, with what some people are calling a double tap assault, with video footage of the strikes circling online. Also a message from Benjamin Netanyahu not necessarily jumping to the gun and calling those killed in the attack Hamas agents like we have seen previously. Professor, your thoughts and the feelings around you on this attack coming out of Israel?
So I think the attack yesterday is different from previous attacks in several ways, and may turn out to be a watershed moment in this conflict. One of the main differences is that this attack was televised. It's very clear that the people who were hurt in the attack were journalists and civilians, and not Hamas terrorists. That's one difference. Another difference that I think is important to point out is that Netanyahu never condemns anything and never expresses any kind of regret about anything. And in this case, he has expressed his regret. This is unusual for him to do. And maybe the third difference is that even traditional Israeli allies have condemned the attack and have called for an end to the conflict, and that includes President Trump, who has pretty much announced that within 2 or 3 weeks, the war needs to end.
Yes, and Professor Hirschberger, people have accused Israel of silencing journalists and silencing voices coming out of the Gaza Strip. This is due to the fact, of course, that international journalists are not allowed into the enclave, which means that the journalists that were killed were indeed Palestinians who have been hired from the outside international legacy media companies that we have previously mentioned. How does this play into that narrative, and what does Israel think of it?
Well, up until yesterday's attack, it was very clear that the boundary between journalists and terrorists is a relatively fuzzy boundary. We've seen during the attacks of October 7th that many of the journalists also moonlight as terrorists, or the terrorists moonlight as journalists. But yesterday, it was much more clear-cut. Yesterday, it was clear that the people who were hurt by the attack were not involved in any kind of terrorist activity. And so this is one of the more clear-cut cases of attacking people who were very clearly not engaged in any kind of activity against Israel.